My brother fired me exactly 9 minutes after the board of directors appointed him CEO of Vance and Associates. It didn't happen in a boardroom or via email. He called me into the corner office, the one with the floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the Chicago skyline, and he did it while checking his reflection in the window. "Elena," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. They were platinum, brand new, probably bought specifically for this moment. "We're pivoting. The IPO is 6 months away, and the investors, well, they want a streamlined narrative. They want the Vance vision, and frankly, your department is just too dense." "Dense," I repeated. My voice was flat. I wasn't asking a question, I was testing the weight of the word. "You're a technician, L," Julian said, finally turning to face me. He had that practiced, pitying smile plastered on his face, the one he used for difficult clients when we were over budget. "You get bogged down in the math. In the rebar and the concrete grades, it's unsexy. It scares off the venture capitalists. We need to sell the dream of the skyline, not the physics that keeps it standing." He walked over to my desk, which I had occupied for 15 years, and dropped a cardboard box onto the blueprints I was reviewing. "Effective immediately," he said. "Security will escort you out in 20 minutes. We'll offer you 6 months severance, assuming you sign the NDA by close of business today." I looked at the box, then I looked at him. For a second, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the HVAC system, a system I had personally redesigned 3 years ago because the original specs were causing condensation in the atrium. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the stapler at his head. I didn't remind him that while he was spending his 20s at marketing mixers and curating his Instagram feed, I was standing in freezing mud at 4 a.m., arguing with contractors about load-bearing ratios. I didn't remind him that I was the one who figured out how to make the spiraling Vance spire actually stand up against the wind sheer off the lake when his visionary sketch was physically impossible. Julian wanted a scene. He wanted the hysterical sister. He wanted to be the calm, rational captain of industry cutting away the emotional dead weight. He was waiting for me to beg so he could feel powerful. Instead, I reached into my desk drawer. I pulled out my grandfather's antique drafting compass, solid brass, heavy, cold to the touch. It was the tool he'd used to draw the first Vance building in 1968. Julian didn't even glance at it. To him, it was just old junk. To me, it was the soul of this firm. I placed it gently into the box, then I looked up at Julian and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile, it wasn't a sad smile. It was the smile of an engineer who just noticed a microscopic fracture in a support beam and knows exactly when the collapse is coming. Julian blinked. His smirk faltered. He took a half step back, his eyes narrowing. "You're taking this well," he said, sounding suspicious. "Why wouldn't I?" asked softly. I picked up a framed photo of our first major project, the Helix Tower in Seattle. I dusted the glass off with my thumb. "You want to be the visionary, Julian. I'm just giving you the space to do it." I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes, just a spark. It was the look of a man who suddenly realizes the silence in the room isn't peaceful, it's heavy. "You don't have the temperament for leadership, Elena," he said, his voice rising slightly, trying to regain control of the narrative. "You're too focused on the details, you miss the big picture. That's why Mom agreed with the decision." That one landed. A sharp, hot spike in my chest. Mom agreed. Of course she did. Catherine Vance had built this firm, but she'd always looked at Julian and seen herself, the charm, the salesmanship, the gloss. She looked at me and saw a calculator. Useful, necessary, but ultimately invisible. "Give my love to Catherine," I said, dropping the photo into the box. "We've already brought in a new engineering lead," Julian continued, talking faster now, needing to fill the void my silence was creating. "A firm from New York, Global Tech Solutions. They're cheaper, faster, and they understand that aesthetics drive the market." "Global Tech," I nodded. "Good luck with them, they're very efficient." I picked up my box, it was light. 15 years of my life, 15 years of saving this family from lawsuits, structural failures, and bankruptcy reduced to 12 pounds of cardboard. "That's it?" Julian asked. He looked genuinely unnerved now. He was sweating slightly under the studio lights. "You're just leaving. You fired me, Julian. What do you want me to do? Stay?" "I expect you to not make trouble," he snapped, his corporate mask slipping just enough to show the insecure little brother underneath. "The severance is generous. Don't burn bridges you might need later." I walked to the door. I paused with my hand on the glass handle, the handle I had selected because the ergonomic profile felt reassuring. I won't burn anything, Julian, I said, turning back to him one last time. I don't have to, you're doing a fine job of that yourself. I walked out. I took the elevator down 40 floors. The descent was smooth, silent, and fast. As the doors opened to the marble lobby, I walked past the security guards who nodded at me with respect, unaware that they were supposed to be escorting me out like a criminal. I walked out the revolving doors and into the biting Chicago wind. Julian stood up there in his glass tower thinking he had won. He thought he had cut costs. He thought he had trimmed the fat. He thought he was the king of the skyline. What my brother didn't know, what he was too busy polishing his platinum cufflinks to notice, was that he hadn't just fired his sister. He had fired the only person who legally owned the patent to the Corex seismic stabilization system. The proprietary technology that sat at the center of every single building Vance and Associates currently had under construction. He thought he was the architect of the future. But he didn't realize I had just walked out with the keys to the foundation. The morning after my termination, I woke up at 4:45 a.m. My internal clock didn't care that my security badge had been deactivated or that my email access was revoked. For 15 years, 4:45 a.m. was the start of my day. It was the only time the city was quiet enough to think, to review the overnight load reports from our construction sites in Dubai and Shanghai, to catch the mistakes that tired junior architects made at 6 p.m. the night before. I sat up in bed, my hand automatically reaching for the tablet on my nightstand. My fingers hovered over the screen, muscle memory anticipating the cool glass. Then I remembered. There would be no reports. No flagged urgent emails from the structural team. No frantic texts from site foremen about concrete curing times, just a blank black screen. I withdrew my hand and sat there in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was deafening. It felt like being sealed inside a soundproof vault. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't Alina Vance, lead architect. I was just a woman sitting in a cold apartment in Chicago, watching the sun come up over a skyline I had helped design but was no longer allowed to touch. I spent the morning pacing. My apartment, a minimalist loft in the West Loop, felt foreign. I had treated it like a hotel room for years, a place to sleep and shower between crises at the firm. Now I was trapped in it. Around 10 a.m., I forced myself to make coffee. I stood by the window, looking south toward the construction site of the Vance Spire. It was supposed to be our masterpiece, a 70-story residential tower with a twisting, organic facade that mimicked a strand of DNA. It was currently at the 20th floor, a skeleton of steel and rebar waiting for the complex, specialized skin that would make it iconic. My phone buzzed on the counter. The sound made me jump. It wasn't Julian. It wasn't HR. It was Marcus, the site foreman for the Spire. Marcus was a 60-year-old bear of a man with hands like catcher's mitts and a zero-tolerance policy for bullshit. We had spent hundreds of hours together in construction trailers, drinking bad coffee and solving impossible geometry problems. I stared at the name on the screen. If I answered, I was violating the severance agreement I hadn't even signed yet. If I answered, I was stepping back into the mess Julian had created. I picked it up. Alina, Marcus's voice was rough, cutting through the static of wind and machinery in the background. I need you to tell me I'm hallucinating. Hello, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice steady. I assume you heard. I got a memo from the office of the CEO saying you're pursuing independent creative ventures. That's corporate speak for Julian lost his damn mind, right? Something like that, right? Well, look, I've got a team of guys here from, Global Tech Solutions. They just showed up in spotless hard hats, holding tablets, and they're telling me to halt the installation of the vibration dampeners on the west elevation. My grip tightened on the phone. Halt them? Why? They're saying it's redundant, Marcus spat the word out. They're saying the primary steel frame is sufficient for wind shear and the dampeners are an unnecessary expense. They want to swap the custom-tuned mass dampers for standard friction plates. Alina, they're talking about saving $3 million, but you and I both know. I know, I interrupted, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew exactly what would happen. The Spire was designed to twist. That twist created unique aerodynamic vortexes, Without the custom-tuned mass dampers, the ones I had spent 6 months designing with a specialist in Tokyo, the building wouldn't fall down, but it would move. In high winds, the sway on the upper floors would accelerate just enough to induce motion sickness. The penthouse owners, the billionaires Julian was counting on to buy those $20 million units, would feel like they were on a cruise ship in a storm every time a gust blew off Lake Michigan. Tell them to check the wind tunnel data from last March, I said, my instinct to protect the building overriding my anger. The torque on the 25th floor creates a harmonic resonance. If they switch to friction plates, the glass curtain wall could crack under the torsion. I told them that, Marcus shouted. The lead guy, some kid named Brad, he rolled his eyes at me, said the new Vance vision is about efficiency. Said you over-engineered everything. Over-engineered, that was the word. Julian called it dense, Brad called it over-engineered. They thought safety was just fat to be trimmed. I closed my eyes, I could save them. I could drive down there right now, storm onto the site, pull up the schematics, and humiliate Brad with the math. I could protect the building, I could protect the firm's reputation, but then I thought about the box. I thought about Julian checking his cufflinks in the window while he erased 15 years of my life. I thought about him calling me a technician. If I fixed this, Julian would never know he was wrong. He would take the credit for the efficiency of the new team, and the building would stand because I saved it from the shadows again. Alina, Marcus asked, his voice softening, what do you want me to do? I can stall them. I can lose the paperwork for the friction plates. I opened my eyes, I looked at the skeletal tower in the distance. Do what they say, Marcus, I said quietly. Silence on the line. What? I don't work for Vance and Associates anymore. Global Tech is the engineer of record now. If they sign off on the friction plates, that's their liability. But the glass, Marcus argued, if it cracks, then they'll have to replace it, I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. It's not our building anymore, Marcus, it's Julian's. Alina, this is gonna be a disaster. I know, I whispered. Be safe, Marcus, watch your guys. I hung up. I stood there for a long time, watching the tiny cranes move against the gray sky. I felt a strange, cold sensation settling in my chest. It wasn't the panic I had felt yesterday, it was something heavier. It was the grim satisfaction of a scientist watching a hypothesis be proven true. Julian wanted to build a kingdom on aesthetics and marketing. He wanted to ignore the physics that held the world together. I took a sip of my coffee. It had gone cold. Let him build it. Let him stack his cheap steel and his friction plates. Let him climb as high as he wanted. I still had the patent for the Corex foundation system in my safe. And without me there to calibrate the load transfers as the building rose, the dampeners were just the beginning of his problems. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and started a new folder. I named it The Collapse. The cracks begin to widen not just on the blueprints, but on the job sites. Marcus sends me photos of dangerous material swaps, and I have to decide how much I'm willing to let burn before I step in. 2 weeks into my retirement, I learned that grief has a specific geometric shape. For me, it was the rectangular outline of my apartment window framing the city I used to build. I tried to fill the void with normal human activities. I bought a coffee maker that cost more than my first car. I read fiction, though I found myself critiquing the structural logic of the plot rather than enjoying the story. I even tried yoga, but lying on a mat in silence just gave my brain more processing power to run simulations of the Vance Spire's wind load calculations. I was ghosting my own life. Meanwhile, my phone had become a dedicated terminal for disaster porn. Marcus was careful. He never called during shift hours. He never used the company email. But every night between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m., my phone would light up with a stream of photos and text messages from the front lines of the Vance Spire. At first, it was small things. They fired the union electricians, he texted on a Tuesday, brought in a non-union crew from Indiana. Half these guys can't read a schematic. I didn't reply. I just saved the text to the encrypted folder on my laptop. Then, the messages got darker. On a rainy Thursday, Marcus sent a close-up photo of a steel delivery sitting in the mud. The resolution was grainy, but I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. The stamp on the I-beam was faint but legible. Series 300, I whispered to the empty room. I felt a cold flush of nausea. The Vance spire was designed with Series 900 high-tensile steel for the lower truss network. It had to be. The entire weight of the twisting upper floors rested on those transfer beams. Series 300 was standard commercial grade, fine for a shopping mall, suicide for a 70-story twisting skyscraper. I typed back furiously, "Tell me that's for the temporary staging platform. Tell me that's not going into the permanent structure." The ellipsis bubble danced for a terrifying minute. "It's for the truss, Alina," Marcus replied. "Global Tech signed off on it. Said the 900 was supply chain constrained and over budget. They ran a new model that claims the 300 holds if they add extra welding points. Extra welding points." I stood up and walked to the window, my forehead resting against the cold glass. You can't weld your way out of physics. If you put grade 300 steel in a high-stress torsion zone, the metal doesn't just bend, it fatigues. Microfissures would start forming within 6 months. In 2 years, you'd hear groaning in the walls. In 5 years, a heavy snow load combined with a high wind event could shear the bolts right off. Julian was trading the structural integrity of a billion-dollar asset for what? A 4% reduction in material costs. He wasn't just being cheap, he was being reckless. He was so desperate to show the board a profitable quarter before the IPO that he was hollowing out the bones of the company. I picked up the phone to call the city inspector. I knew him. Frank drank at the pub on 4th Street. One call from me and he'd have a stop work order on that site by morning. My thumb hovered over the contact. If I called Frank, the project stops. Julian spins it as bureaucratic red tape or blames legacy design flaws left by me. He plays the victim, he survives, but if I let them pour the concrete around those beams, the flaw becomes permanent. It becomes evidence. It was the hardest decision of my life. To let a flaw exist in a building I loved was a violation of every oath I'd taken as an engineer. It felt like watching a surgeon knowingly stitch up a patient with a scalpel still inside, but I wasn't the surgeon anymore. I was the witness. "Document it," I texted Marcus back. "Get the batch numbers, get the signature of the global tech engineer who approved the swap, and Marcus, don't sign anything yourself." "Way ahead of you, boss," he replied. "I'm keeping a personal log, but Alina, the guys are scared. They know this steel is wrong. It feels light." "Tell them to keep their heads down," I wrote, my fingers trembling, "and tell them to wear their harnesses." Double-clipped, I closed the laptop. I felt dirty. I felt complicit. But then I thought about the meeting Julian had scheduled with the investors next week, the Vance Vision Gala. He would be there in his tuxedo, pointing at the rising tower, talking about grace and strength. He didn't know that he was building his own tomb. The next morning, the nausea was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I wasn't just unemployed, I was an investigator. I needed to understand not just what Julian was doing, but why. Why the sudden, frantic desperation for cash? The firm had been healthy when I left. We had reserves. Why risk a catastrophic structural failure for a few $1,000,000 in savings? It didn't add up. Julian was vain, but he wasn't stupid. He wouldn't risk prison for a slightly better margin. Unless he needed the money for something else, something off the books. I went to my closet and pushed aside the steel-toed boots and the high-vis vests. I pulled out a silk blouse and a tailored blazer, my client meeting armor. My mother, Catherine, had texted me 3 times since the firing. "Lunch, we need to clear the air." I had ignored her, but now I needed intel, and nobody leaked information quite like Catherine Vance after her second glass of Sansera. I checked my reflection. I didn't look like the dense technician anymore. I looked like a woman who knew where the bodies were buried because she had drawn the blueprints for the cemetery. I grabbed my purse. It was time to go to lunch. The oak room at the Drake Hotel smells like old money, a specific blend of beeswax polish, expensive gin, and the dusty silence of people who have never had to shout to be heard. I arrived exactly 4 minutes late. In the Vance family, being on time was expected, being early was eager, being late was a power move. My mother, Catherine, was already seated at our usual corner table. She looked, as always, like a piece of architectural art herself. Her silver hair was cut in a sharp, asymmetrical bob that cost more than a site foreman's annual salary. She was wearing a cream blazer that I knew was Armani, and she was sipping sparkling water with a slice of lemon, her posture rigid enough to pass a seismic stress test. She didn't stand when I approached. She just tracked me with her eyes, cool and assessing. "You look tired, Alina," she said. "No hello, no hug, just an immediate critique of the facade. I'm unemployed, mother." "It disrupts the sleep cycle," I replied, sliding into the leather booth. I placed my phone face down on the table, a silent signal that I was present, but the line to the outside world was right there within reach. "You are not unemployed," she sighed, signaling the waiter with a microscopic flick of her wrist. "You are on a sabbatical." Julian and I agreed that the transition was abrupt but necessary. "Abrupt," I repeated. He locked me out of the server before he even told me I was fired. He put my grandfather's compass in a cardboard box like it was trash. Catherine waved a manicured hand, dismissing the violence of the act as a minor social faux pas. "Julian is dramatic, you know that. He feels things deeply. He felt that the firm needed a new energy, a clean break from the heaviness of the past." "Heaviness," I said, unfolding my napkin. "You mean the engineering standards? The safety protocols, the math that keeps the buildings from killing people. You always do this," she said, her voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet register she used when I was a child. "You make everything so catastrophic." "Julian is building a brand, Alina. He's creating a lifestyle. People don't buy condos in the Spire because of the rebar, they buy them because of the feeling." "The feeling," I said, leaning in. "Right now, the feeling on the Spire site is panic." He swapped the Series 900 steel for grade 300 in the lower truss network. "Did you know that?" Catherine didn't blink. She took a sip of her water. "I don't get involved in the procurement details, darling. That's Julian's purview. It's not procurement, it's negligence. If that steel fails, the torsional load will snap the curtain wall. Glass will rain down on Michigan Avenue. He has engineers," she snapped, a flash of irritation finally breaking through the lacquer. "New ones, modern ones. They assured the board that the savings are substantial and the risk is negligible." "Why does he need the savings?" The question hung in the air between us. Catherine froze just for a split second. Her hand paused halfway to her glass. It was a tiny structural tremor in her composure. "The market is volatile," she said too quickly. "The firm has 50 million in reserves," I countered. "Or we did when I left 2 weeks ago. Why is he stripping the copper out of the walls, Mom? Why is he risking a catastrophic failure for a 4% margin bump?" She looked away, out the window toward the lake. "He has ambitions, expansions. The Vance name is going global. He's setting up a satellite studio, an experimental design lab. He calls it Novo." "Novo," the word landed soft, but it echoed loud in my head. "Novo?" I asked, keeping my face neutral. "I haven't seen that on any board agenda." "It's in the early stages," Catherine said, recovering her poise. A small, proud smile touched her lips. "He wants to prove he can build something from scratch without the weight of the family legacy. He wants to show he's a creator, not just an heir." The pieces clicked into place with the force of a hydraulic press. Julian wasn't just skimming off the top, he was funneling capital. He was using Vance and Associates, our family firm, my grandfather's legacy, as a piggy bank to fund his own vanity project. He was gutting the Spire, stripping it of its safety features and channeling that cash into Novo. He was building his own lifeboat while drilling holes in our ship. "So," I said slowly, "he's siphoning operating capital from the Spire to fund a private venture. That's why he needed the IPO, to fill the hole before the auditors noticed." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "You make it sound criminal. It's diversification. He's the CEO. He has discretion." "He has a fiduciary duty," I corrected. "And he fired me because he knew I'd see the transfers. I'm the only one who checks the line items against the physical inventory." "He fired you because you stifle him," Catherine hissed, leaning across the table. Her veneer cracked completely. "You are just like your father was, obsessed with limits, obsessed with rules. Julian is trying to fly and you are constantly trying to bolt him to the ground." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear behind the arrogance. She knew, deep down, she knew Julian was reckless. She knew he was hollow. But he was her golden boy, the reflection of her own vanity, and she would let him burn the whole world down just to prove he was brilliant. I realized then that there was no saving her. She had picked her side. I placed my napkin on the table. I didn't wait for the food. "Flying is easy, Mom," I said, sliding out of the booth. "Landing is the hard part. Especially when you've sold the landing gear to pay for the paint job." Where are you going? She demanded, her voice rising. We haven't ordered. I'm not hungry, I said, and you should tell Julian to be careful with Novo. Starting a competing business while serving as CEO, the SEC has a term for that, so does the district attorney. Alina, I walked away. I walked past the maitre d', past the dessert cart, and out into the lobby. My hands were shaking not from fear but from rage. Novo, he was building a shadow company. He was stealing the money, the resources, and I was willing to bet the intellectual property. I pulled out my phone. I didn't text Marcus this time. I texted a number I hadn't used in 5 years. A forensic accountant named David who owed me a favor from the time I caught a contractor padding invoices on the O'Hare expansion. I need you to find a shell company, I typed. Name is Novo, check for wire transfers from Vance and Associates under consulting fees or R&D, and David, dig deep. Julian wanted to build something new, fine. I was going to find the blueprints, and then I was going to burn it down. Information usually moves like water, it follows the path of least resistance. But in the world of forensic accounting, information moves like a laser through a diamond. It refracts, it bends, but eventually, if you know where to look, it illuminates the flaw. David arrived at my loft at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. He didn't look like a private investigator from a noir film. He looked like an actuary who had seen too much, a slight man in a beige cardigan, carrying a heavy encrypted laptop and smelling faintly of Earl Grey tea. You have good coffee, I hope, David said, stepping over a pile of schematic tubes I'd pulled from storage. Because the numbers I'm about to show you are going to keep us awake until dawn. I poured him a black coffee. How bad is it? It's not bad, Alina, it's artistically corrupt. He opened his laptop on my dining table, pushing aside my half-eaten toast. Your brother isn't just skimming, he's building a pipeline. He turned the screen toward me. It was a visualization of Vance and Associates' cash flow over the last 18 months. It looked like a bleeding artery. Here, David pointed to a series of transfers labeled external consultancies. Starting 6 months before your father passed, Julian began authorizing payments to 3 LLCs registered in Delaware. Apex Aesthetics, Horizon Form, and Novo Holdings. Do those names mean anything to you? No, I said, leaning in. We use approved vendors. I sign off on every consultant. I've never seen these. That's because the invoices were processed through the marketing budget, not operations, David explained, his voice dry. He categorized them as brand strategy and visual identity development. That bypassed your approval queue. I watched the red lines on the screen pulsing from the Vance accounts into these ghost companies. How much? $14 million, David said quietly. So far. My stomach dropped. $14 million, that was the exact amount of the contingency fund for the Spire. That was the safety net. That was why he swapped the steel. He hadn't cut costs to save the company, he had looted the company to fill these accounts. But here is where it gets interesting, David continued, tapping a key. I traced the outflows from Novo Holdings. They aren't sitting in a Cayman account, they're being spent in Chicago. Spent on what? Rent, equipment, salaries. David pulled up a new window. He's leasing a 10,000 square foot warehouse in the meatpacking district. He's bought 20 high-end CAD workstations, and he's paying a payroll company for 12 employees. I stared at the screen, a warehouse, workstations, staff. He's not just planning a company, I whispered. He's already running it. And there's one more thing, David said. I managed to get into the metadata of the files he's been sending to the Novo server. He didn't just take the money, Alina. David clicked a file named Master Archive Transfer Log. The list scrolled down the screen, hundreds of file names flashing by. Project Helix Blueprints DWG, Spire Wind Load Data XLS, Corex Patent Filing Draft PDF, Client List Tyrone CSV. The heir left the room. He hadn't just stolen the cash, he had cloned the firm. He had downloaded my brain. Every design I had ever drawn, every structural solution I had invented, every client relationship I had nurtured for 15 years, he had copied it all and moved it to a warehouse 3 miles away. He was going to bankrupt Vance and Associates, let the Spire fail or stall, and then rise from the ashes with Novo Studio, presenting my work as his fresh, unburdened vision. He stole the Corex designs, I said, my voice shaking with a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. He's planning to use the seismic system I invented for his new projects. Does he know you hold the patent personally? David asked. Not the firm, he thinks he knows, I said. He thinks because the firm paid the filing fees, the firm owns it. He didn't read the contract my grandfather wrote. Granddad didn't trust the board, he trusted me. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red. Julian thought he was a genius. He thought he could strip mine my talent and discard the person who created it. He thought I was just the technician, the invisible hand that he could sever and reattach to his new body. Can we go there? I asked, turning back to David. To the warehouse? David hesitated. It's private property, Alina. If we break in, I don't need to break in, I said. If he's using my designs, if he's using the Corex system, I need to see it. I need to see what he's building with my stolen life. And if you catch him, I'm not going to catch him, David, I said, grabbing my coat. I'm going to let him finish the prototype. You don't demolish a building when they're digging the foundation. You wait until they top out, until the weight is at its maximum. I looked at the screen one last time, the red lines of theft, the list of stolen files. I need the address, I said. I'm going to see my brother's new kingdom.
The warehouse was located on the edge of the meatpacking district, a block where the smell of old brick dust mixed with the metallic tang of the elevated train tracks. It was the kind of industrial chic space Julian drooled over: exposed brick, massive windows, the aesthetic of grit without the actual inconvenience of labor. I sat in the passenger seat of David's sedan, the engine off, watching the rain streak the windshield. It was 11:45 p.m. You realize, David said, adjusting his glasses, that if we were detectives in a movie, this is the part where we drink bad coffee and wait for a courier. But in reality, we're just two people sitting in the dark watching a loading dock. He's in there, I said. My eyes were fixed on the second-floor windows. The blinds were drawn, but not tight enough. Slivers of cool, blue light escaped, the unmistakable 5,000 temperature of high-end drafting monitors. The lights are on. Architects don't sleep, David, we just render. The money trail ends here, Alina. The lease, the equipment, the payroll, it's all novo. I need to know who is on that payroll. As if on cue, a rideshare car pulled up to the curb. The door opened. I stopped breathing. It wasn't Julian. It was Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was my senior project lead. I had hired her out of grad school 6 years ago. I had taught her how to calculate wind shear on a curved facade when everyone else told her it was impossible. I had sat with her in the hospital waiting room when her appendix burst during the Rio project. She wasn't just an employee. She was my protégé. Sarah stepped out of the car, pulled her hood up against the rain, and tapped a code into the keypad on the side door. The light turned green. She walked into my brother's secret fortress like she lived there. That's Sarah, I whispered, the fog on the window obscuring my view as I leaned closer. Is she supposed to be working late at Vance? David asked. No, she's supposed to be loyal. 2 minutes later, another car, then a taxi. I watched, paralyzed, as 3 more of my team, my Corex development team, walked through that door. Kevin, the structural analyst. Maya, the BIM specialist. And Leo, the sustainability director. These weren't just staff. These were the only 4 people on Earth who fully understood the integration of the Corex system into the Vance Spire. He's not just building a shell company, I said, my voice sounding hollow, unrecognizable to my own ears. He's decapitating the firm, he's taking the brain trust. I opened the car door. Alina, wait, David hissed. You can't go in there, it's trespassing. I'm not going in, I said, stepping into the rain. But I need to see what he's selling them. I crossed the wet asphalt, moving toward the alley on the east side of the building. I knew these converted warehouses. I had renovated a dozen of them. There was always a fire escape, and the windows on the landing were rarely alarmed because nobody expected a 38-year-old structural engineer to climb a wet iron ladder in the middle of the night. I climbed. The metal was slick, freezing my hands, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt a burning, radioactive anger. I reached the second-floor landing. The window was tall, industrial, and unwashed. I wiped a circle of grime away with my sleeve and looked inside. The space was open plan, lit by the glow of the monitors and a few expensive designer lamps. It looked like a startup fantasy. Pizza boxes on the tables, bottles of expensive red wine, a ping-pong table in the corner. And there, in the center of the room, was Julian. He was standing in front of a massive whiteboard, holding a glass of wine, gesturing expansively. He looked energized, magnetic, the way he always looked when he was selling a lie. Sarah and the others were sitting on Herman Miller chairs, listening, laughing. They looked comfortable. They looked happy. Then I looked at the wall behind Julian. Pinned up on the corkboard were large format prints. My prints, the elevations for the Vance spire, the cross-sections of the Helix Tower, the schematic for the Corex dampeners. But the title blocks had been changed. Where it should have said Vance and Associates lead architect, Elena Vance, there was a new, sleek logo. A stylized N, Novo Studio, Project the Zenith. He had taken my spire, my masterpiece, renamed it, and was pitching it to my own team as the flagship project of his new empire. He was claiming authorship of 15 years of my engineering. I watched Sarah stand up and point to a section of the drawing, a section I had struggled with for months. She smiled at Julian, and he nodded, patting her on the shoulder. It wasn't just theft, it was erasure. He was rewriting history in real time, with me edited out of the narrative completely. He was giving them equity, likely, promising them that without the dead weight of the old firm me, they would be the rock stars of the industry. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass. I wanted to smash it. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. I wanted to storm in there and tear those drawings off the wall and ask Sarah how she could look me in the eye ever again. But then I saw something else. On the table, next to the wine, was a stack of thick documents. Employment agreements. If Julian was smart, he had them sign non-competes. But if he was arrogant, and Julian was the Mozart of arrogance, he had them sign knowledge transfer clauses. He would want them to legally commit to bringing the Vance client lists and proprietary methods with them. If those documents existed, and if they detailed the transfer of the Corex tech, that wasn't just a startup. That was a federal crime. That was industrial espionage. I pulled back from the window. The rain washed the tears off my face before I even realized I was crying. I climbed down the fire escape, my movements mechanical, precise. I got back into the car. I was soaked to the bone. Elena, David asked, looking at my face. What did you see? I buckled my seatbelt. I didn't look at the warehouse. I looked straight ahead. I saw the evidence, I said. And I saw the mistake. What mistake? He thinks he bought their loyalty with pizza and equity, I said. But he forgot one thing. Those drawings on the wall, they rely on a patent that expires in the hands of Vance and Associates if the primary architect is terminated. I turned to David. The sadness was gone, the shock was gone. Drive, I said. I need to make a phone call. To whom? Your lawyer. No, I said, watching the warehouse disappear in the rearview mirror. To the only people who hate Julian Vance as much as I do right now. Who is that? Meridian Collective, I said. Our biggest competitor. I'm going to offer them a deal they can't refuse. Walking into the lobby of Meridian Collective felt like walking into a confessional. For 15 years, this building had been the enemy. At Vance and Associates, we were taught that Meridian was the competition, the rival, the other. If we were the flashy, high-tech jet fighters of the architectural world, Meridian was the aircraft carrier, massive, slow-moving, and unsinkable. Their headquarters wasn't a glass tower. It was a renovated timber and brick warehouse in the Navy Pier district, smelling of cedar and roasted coffee. It didn't scream, "Look at me." It whispered, "I'll be here for 100 years." I checked in at the front desk. My hands were sweating. I felt like a double agent carrying state secrets in a briefcase, which, legally speaking, I almost was. Elena Vance, I told the receptionist. I have a 10 a.m. with Elias Thorne. She didn't blink at the last name. Mr. Thorne is expecting you in the library. Elias Thorne was a legend. He was 70 years old, a Pritzker Prize winner who refused to wear a suit. He believed architecture was a public service, not a vanity project. My grandfather had respected him. My brother called him a dinosaur. I walked into the library. Elias was standing by a window overlooking the gray water of Lake Michigan, wearing a corduroy blazer and holding a mug of tea. Elena, he said, turning around. His face was a map of deep lines, etched by decades of squinting at sun-bleached blueprints. I heard you left the family business, or were pushed. Push is a polite word for it, I said, setting my portfolio on a heavy oak table. I was ejected while in flight. And yet, Elias smiled slightly, you seem to have landed on your feet. Why are you here, Elena? You know we don't hire Vances. It complicates the insurance. I'm not looking for a job, Elias, I said. I'm looking for a partner. I unzipped the portfolio. I didn't pull out a resume. I pulled out a single, thick document bound in blue legal cardstock. The patent filing for the Corex seismic stabilization system. Elias walked over, his eyes sharpening. He recognized the title immediately. Every architect in the city knew about Corex. It was the magic that allowed the Vance spire to twist 70 degrees without snapping in half during a blizzard. I thought Vance and Associates held this, Elias said, tapping the cover. Vance and Associates paid the filing fees, I corrected. But the inventor is listed as Alina Vance, and the assignment clause in my grandfather's original partnership agreement, which Julian never bothered to read, states that in the event of my termination without cause, the usage rights revert to the inventor exclusively. Elias looked at me, then back at the document. Does Julian know this? He thinks he owns me, I said. So by extension, he thinks he owns what I made. He's currently building the spire using this system. He's also designing a new project, the Zenith, using this system under a shell company called Novo Studio. And without it, I said, meeting his gaze, the spire is just a very expensive, very unstable sculpture, and the Zenith is physically impossible to build. Elias sat down slowly. He understood the physics. He understood the leverage. If I sign an exclusive licensing agreement with Meridian, I continued, my voice steady, then Julian is currently infringing on your intellectual property. You could issue a cease and desist order that would halt construction on the spire tomorrow morning. That would bankrupt him, Elias said softly. It would destroy your family's firm. He's already destroying it, I said. He's swapping grade 900 steel for commercial grade to fund his vanity project. He's poaching my staff. He's risking the lives of everyone who will eventually walk into those buildings. I'm not asking you to destroy him, Elias. I'm asking you to help me stop him before he kills someone. The room went silent. I could hear the faint sound of a foghorn on the lake. I was handing him the keys to the kingdom. With Corex, Meridian could take over the high-rise market in Chicago. They could fix the spire. They could build the future. But it required me to betray my blood. You know, Elias said, leaning back, your grandfather once told me that you were the only one who actually understood gravity. Julian understood flight, but you understood what brings things back down. Is that a yes? It depends, Elias said. I don't want to just be your lawyer, Alina. I want your brain. If we do this, you come on as a partner. You run the structural division. You fix the mess Julian made, but you do it under the Meridian banner. I want full autonomy, I said, and I want the right to rehire any Vance staff who were coerced into leaving. Done. Elias extended his hand. It was warm, dry, and rough. A builder's hand. As I shook it, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't guilt. I thought it would be guilt, but it felt like relief. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. I had an army. And more importantly, I had a fortress. We'll have legal draw up the papers by noon, Elias said. And Alina? Yes, when we drop the hammer on Julian, do you want to be in the room? I thought about the warehouse. I thought about Sarah laughing at Julian's jokes while standing in front of my stolen drawings. I thought about the box with my compass in it. No, I said coldly. I don't want to be in the room. I want to be the one who locks the door. I walked out of Meridian Collective an hour later. The rain had stopped. The sun was trying to break through the clouds. I pulled out my phone and texted David. It's done. Prepare the file on the steel swaps. We're going to leak it to the press on Monday. Julian wanted to be famous. I was about to make him the most famous architect in Chicago, just not for the reasons he expected. Monday morning arrived with the deceptive calm of a receding tide. The sky over Chicago was a brilliant, cloudless blue, the kind of weather architects pray for because it makes the glass on the skyscrapers sing. I sat in a guest office at Meridian Collective, a cup of green tea steaming on the desk. My phone was face up next to me. At 8 a.m., the embargo lifted. The article didn't appear in a gossip rag or a blog. It appeared on the front page of Crane's Chicago Business, the Bible of the city's real estate elite. The headline was stark, unglamorous, and devastating. Steel grade discrepancies halt inspections at Vance Spire. Safety concerns cited. I didn't need to read it. I had helped draft the technical addendum. The article detailed the swap of grade 900 high-tensile steel for grade 300. It included photos of the batch stamps, courtesy of Marcus, and a quote from an anonymous, independent structural analyst. Me, explaining that under high-wind conditions, the lower truss network would suffer catastrophic fatigue within 5 years. It wasn't a hit piece. It was a forensic report. By 8:15 a.m., the Vance and Associates stock, which Julian had been pumping for the IPO, dipped 4%. By 8:45 a.m., after the city inspector, Frank, whom I had anonymously tipped off, announced an immediate safety stand-down order for the site, the stock fell another 12%. I watched the red arrows on my monitor. I imagined the scene inside the glass tower across town. Julian would be screaming. He would be throwing things. He would be blaming the contractors, the suppliers, the weather. He would be calling Global Tech Solutions, demanding they fix the narrative. But you can't spin tensile strength. Steel either holds or it shears. At 9 a.m., the second bomb dropped. This one wasn't public. It was delivered by a bike messenger to the front desk of Vance and Associates. A heavy, cream-colored envelope containing a cease and desist order signed by the legal counsel of Meridian Collective. The document was simple. It stated that the license for the Corex seismic stabilization system was contractually tied to the employment of its inventor, Elena Vance. Upon her termination without cause, the license had expired. Effective immediately, Vance and Associates was unauthorized to build, market, or deploy any structure utilizing the Corex patent. This meant the spire, which was currently 40% built and relied entirely on Corex to stay upright, was illegal. It also meant that the Zenith, the secret project Julian was designing at Novo Studio, was dead on the drawing board. My phone rang at 9:12 a.m., Julian Vance. I watched the name flash on the screen. I let it ring. It rang again, and again. Then a text, "Pick up the phone, Elena, we need to talk." Then another, "This is insane. You're destroying the family legacy." I took a sip of tea. The irony tasted bitter. He was the one who had swapped the steel. He was the one who had hollowed out the safety protocols. I was just turning on the lights so everyone could see the rot. Around 10:30 a.m., a different name flashed on my screen. Sarah Jenkins. This one made my chest tight. Sarah, my protégé. Sarah, who was currently sitting in that warehouse working for Novo, I debated answering. Sarah was caught in the middle. She was young, ambitious, and she had believed Julian's lies. Part of me wanted to save her, but saving her now would ruin the lesson. I let it go to voicemail. At 11 a.m., Elias Thorne walked into my office. He looked grim but satisfied. "The city just pulled the permits for the spire," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Indefinitely, until an independent audit of all materials is conducted." "Julian will try to bribe the inspectors," I said. "He can't, the press is all over it. The mayor just gave a statement saying safety is Chicago's priority. Julian is radioactive." Elias walked over to the window. "You know, Elena, I've seen firms collapse before. Usually it takes years. Bad management is a slow termite, but this is a controlled demolition." "Is that a criticism?" "It's an observation of efficiency," Elias smiled. "But be ready, the board of directors at Vance isn't going to go down with the ship. They're rats, and rats swim toward the nearest life raft." "I'm not a life raft," I said. "I'm the iceberg." "No," Elias corrected. "You're the only person who knows how to patch the hull. They're going to call you, Elena, not Julian, the board." As if he had summoned it, my phone rang again. It wasn't Julian. It wasn't Sarah. It was Marcus Webb, the chairman of the board for Vance and Associates. He was an old friend of my father's, a man who had voted to approve Julian's CEO appointment because he liked Julian's golf game. I looked at Elias. He nodded. I picked up the phone. "Hello, Marcus," I said. "Elena," Marcus sounded breathless like he had run up a flight of stairs. We have a situation." "I read the news, Marcus. It sounds like you have a steel problem." "It's not just the steel, it's the patent thing. The lawyer says we can't finish the building. Elena, the investors are pulling out. The stock is in freefall. We're looking at bankruptcy by Friday." "That sounds like a complex problem for the CEO to solve," I said, my voice ice cold. Julian is compromised," Marcus stammered. "We're calling an emergency board session for tomorrow afternoon. We need answers. We need to know if the building can be saved." "The building is flawed, Marcus. It has bad bones." "Can it be fixed?" he pleaded. "Elena, please. For your father's sake, can you fix it?" I paused. I looked out the window at the skyline. I saw the cranes stop dead on the spire. I saw the millions of dollars of potential waste. I saw my legacy rusting in the air. "I can fix the building, Marcus," I said, "but the cost of the repair is going to be higher than you think." "Name your price, consulting fee, double your old salary." "I don't want a salary," I said. "I want a seat at the table. I'll be at the meeting tomorrow and I'm bringing my own legal counsel." "Okay," Marcus breathed. "Okay, 2 p.m. please, Elena, just bring a solution." I hung up. I looked at Elias. They bit, he asked. They swallowed the hook, I said. Tomorrow we go back to the glass tower. And Julian, I said, standing up and smoothing my blazer, is about to find out that gravity is a bitch. The boardroom at Vance and Associates was designed to intimidate. It was a suspended glass box on the 45th floor, cantilevered out over the street so that when you sat at the table, you felt like you were floating in the sky. 6 weeks ago, I had walked out of this building carrying a cardboard box. Today, I walked back and flanked by Elias Thorne and 2 senior litigators from Meridian Collective. The room was already full. The air conditioning was set too low, a classic psychological trick to keep people alert, but today it just made the sweat on Julian's forehead more obvious. He sat at the head of the mahogany table, looking like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. His tie was loosened. His eyes were bloodshot. To his right sat my mother, Catherine. She looked smaller than I remembered, her Armani armor unable to hide the tremor in her hands as she clasped them on the table. To his left was Marcus Webb and the rest of the board. 6 men and women who had watched me grow up, who had attended my graduation, and who had silently endorsed my firing because they thought it would boost the share price. This is highly irregular, Julian started the moment I stepped through the glass doors. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder. Elena, bringing competitors into a closed board session is a breach of confidentiality. We're not competitors, Julian, I said, taking the seat at the opposite end of the table. Elias sat next to me, placing his briefcase on the polished wood with a heavy thud. We're your landlords, effectively. You're obstructing business, Julian spat, standing up. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You sabotaged the Spire. You leaked that report about the steel. You're trying to tank the stock so you can buy back in cheap. It's market manipulation. I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I just slid a folder across the table toward Marcus. The report wasn't sabotage, Julian. It was a diagnosis. You swapped grade 900 steel for grade 300. That's a fact. The city inspector confirmed it this morning. The board members exchanged nervous glances. Marcus opened the folder, his face paling as he looked at the photos of the compromised beams. But that's a fixable problem, Julian insisted, looking desperate. We can reinforce the trusses. We can retrofit. What isn't fixable is you holding the patent hostage. The Corex system belongs to this firm. Actually, Elias spoke up, his voice gravelly and calm, it belongs to the inventor. And since you terminated the inventor without cause, the license has expired. If you pour 1 more cubic yard of concrete on that site, Meridian will sue you for patent infringement. The damages will exceed the total value of your assets. Silence descended on the room. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of money evaporating. So, here is where we stand, I said, leaning forward. You have a half-built tower you can't finish legally. You have a safety violation that has frozen your permits. And you have a stock price that is currently trading at a 3-year low. What do you want, Elena? Catherine asked softly. Do you want your job back? Is that it? Because we can. I don't want my job, I interrupted. I'm a partner at Meridian now. I'm here to present an acquisition offer. Acquisition? Julian laughed, a high, brittle sound. You think Meridian can buy us? We're Vance and Associates. We're a dynasty. You were a dynasty, I said. Now you're a liability. I signaled to Elias. He pulled out a second document, a thick stack of financial records. But the patent isn't why I'm really here, I said, locking eyes with my brother. I'm here to talk about Novo Studio. Julian froze. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Novo? Marcus asked, looking up from the steel report. What is Novo? Novo Studio, I explained, is a shell company registered in Delaware. It operates out of a warehouse in the meatpacking district. Over the last 18 months, $14 million of Vance capital has been transferred to Novo under disguised vendor invoices. That's a lie, Julian whispered. It's in the ledger, Julian, I said, sliding the forensic accounting report down the table. 14 million. That's exactly the amount of the contingency fund you raided. That's why you bought the cheap steel. You didn't cut costs to save the firm. You looted the firm to build your lifeboat. The board members were grabbing for the papers now, flipping through the pages, seeing the transfers, the dates, the amounts. He's been poaching staff, I continued, relentless. Sarah Jenkins, Kevin, Maya, they're all on the Novo payroll, paid for with Vance money. He's been transferring proprietary data, client lists, blueprints, the Corex schematics to a private server. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the report in front of her, her mouth slightly open. She was reading the list of stolen assets. He wasn't expanding the brand, Mom, I said gently. He was stealing the furniture while the house was burning down. Julian, Catherine whispered. She looked up at her son. Is this true? Julian looked around the room. He saw the anger in Marcus's eyes. He saw the shock on the board members' faces. He saw the end of his career. I was protecting our interests, he stammered, sweating profusely now. The firm was stagnant. Elena was holding us back. I needed a clean slate to steal $14 million, Marcus roared, slamming his hand on the table. You embezzled from us while you were CEO. It was a loan, Julian shouted back. I was going to pay it back once Novo launched. It was bridge capital. It was theft, I said. And it's corporate espionage. The SEC is already reviewing the file. So is the district attorney. Julian collapsed back into his chair. He looked small. He looked like the little brother who used to break my models and blame the wind. The board has a choice, I said, standing up. You can let this play out in criminal court, watch the stock hit zero and lose everything. Or you can accept Meridian's offer. What's the offer? Marcus asked, his voice defeated. Meridian acquires the Vance assets, including the Spire at current market value. We assume the liability for the repairs. We retain the staff. The Vance name stays on the building, but the management changes. And Julian? Catherine asked. Her voice was barely audible. I looked at my brother. He was staring at the table, defeated. Julian resigns, I said. Effective immediately. He surrenders his equity to cover the embezzled funds. And he signs a lifetime ban from practicing architecture in the state of Illinois. You can't do that, Julian whispered. Architecture is my life. No, Julian, I said, closing my portfolio. Architecture is about structure. You never cared about the structure, you only cared about the view. I turned to the door. You have 1 hour to vote, I said. I'll be waiting in the lobby. I walked out of the glass box. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the gravity shifting in the room behind me. The Vance dynasty was collapsing, and for the first time in history, I wasn't going to be the one to catch it. Victory, I discovered, doesn't sound like a trumpet blast. It sounds like the soft ding of an elevator arriving at the ground floor. I was standing near the security desk in the lobby, watching the digital floor indicator descend. 40, 30, 20. Elias stood next to me, checking his watch. The legal transfer is already executing, he said quietly. As of 2 minutes ago, Meridian Collective is the majority shareholder of the Vance assets. You own the building, Elena, or at least the controlling interest in it. I didn't answer. I was watching the doors. When they finally slid open, it wasn't a triumphant procession. It was a funeral march. Julian walked out first. He wasn't wearing his jacket. His tie was gone. He was carrying a small box, not the standard banker's box I had been given, but a small, sleek crate that looked like it held expensive whiskey. 2 security guards, the same men who had nodded to me with respect 6 weeks ago, walked a polite 3 paces behind him. They weren't holding his arms, but their presence was absolute. Do not stop. Do not make a scene. Leave. Julian looked wrecked. The gloss was gone. He looked like a rendering that hadn't finished processing, blurry, indistinct, pixelated by shock. He saw me standing there. He stopped. The guards paused, waiting. You did it, Julian said. His voice was raspy. You actually burned it down. I didn't burn it, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I just put out the fire you started. Unfortunately, the furniture was already smoke-damaged. I was going to pay it back, he insisted, a flash of the old arrogance trying to spark in his eyes but failing. Novo was going to be huge. We would have merged. I was trying to evolve us. You were trying to erase me, I corrected. And in doing so, you erased yourself. The ban is effective immediately, Julian. You can't sign a blueprint in this state again. You're not an architect anymore. You're just a guy with a nice suit and a criminal record pending. He flinched. That was the kill shot. Stripping the money was one thing, stripping the identity was another. What am I supposed to do? He whispered. It was a question from a child. I don't know, I said. Maybe try building something real for once. Start with an apology, but don't start with me. I stepped aside. I cleared the path to the revolving doors. He hesitated, looking at me, waiting for the sisterly instinct to kick in, for me to offer him a lifeline, a loan, a hug. I felt the phantom limb of that instinct, the decades of covering for him, of fixing his math, of smoothing over his tantrums. I let the feeling pass. I stayed planted like a load-bearing column. Julian walked past me. He pushed through the revolving door and stepped out into the Chicago wind. He didn't look back. A moment later, the elevator dinged again. My mother, Catherine, stepped out. She looked 10 years older than she had at lunch. She was walking with Marcus, who was holding her elbow as if she might faint. She saw me and stopped. Her eyes were red. "Elena," she said. Her voice was brittle. "He's your brother." "He's a felon, mother," I said. "And you were the getaway driver. You let him drive the car because you liked how he looked behind the wheel." I didn't know the extent of it," she stammered. "The embezzlement, I didn't know." "You didn't look," I said, "because looking would have required you to value my work over his potential, and you never could do that." She looked at me with a mix of grief and something that looked terrifyingly like respect. She had never respected me when I was the dutiful daughter. Now that I was the conqueror, she finally saw me. "I'm stepping down from the board," she said softly. "Marcus is handling the transition." "Good," I said. "Go to the lake house, Mom. Rest, we'll talk eventually, but not today." She nodded, wiped her face, and walked out the door, following the ghost of her son. "Elena," I turned. Marcus Webb was standing there, looking exhausted but relieved. He held out a key card. It wasn't a guest pass, it was the master access card. "The staff is waiting in the main atrium," he said. "They're confused, they're scared. Rumors are flying about bankruptcy, about FBI raids. They need to hear from the new ownership." I took the card. It felt heavy. "Did you call the Novo team?" I asked. "Sarah and the others." "I told them to come to the main office," Marcus said. "They're in the conference room. Separated from the rest." I nodded. "I'm going up," I said to Elias. "Do you want me to come?" Elias asked. "No," I said. "I need to do this part alone. It's a structural repair. You have to strip it down to the studs." I took the elevator up. The ride was silent. When the doors opened on the 40th floor, the hum of the office was different. It wasn't the busy, productive noise of a firm at work. It was the hushed, terrified murmur of a crew on a sinking ship waiting for the captain to tell them to abandon ship. I walked into the atrium. 200 heads turned. Designers, interns, project managers, admins. People I had hired. People I had trained. People who had watched me pack a box and leave 6 weeks ago without saying a word. They stared at me. I walked to the center of the room, standing on the Vance and Associates logo inlaid in the terrazzo floor. "Everyone, listen up," I said. My voice projected clearly, honed by years of shouting over jackhammers. "My name is Elena Vance. As of an hour ago, this firm has been acquired by Meridian Collective." A ripple of gasps went through the room. "The Vance Spire project is resuming," I continued, cutting through the panic. "But we are stripping the steel. We are going back to the grade 900 specs. It will be expensive, it will be hard, but it will be safe." I looked around the room, meeting their eyes. "Your jobs are safe," I said. "Most of them. But we are going to have to rebuild more than just the tower. We have to rebuild the trust. And that starts now." I turned to the receptionist. "Where is Sarah?" "Conference room B," she whispered, looking terrified. "Thank you." I walked toward conference room B. The glass walls were frosted, but I could see the silhouettes inside. My CoreX team, the defectors, the ones who had chosen the pizza and the lie. I put my hand on the door handle. This was the part I had dreaded. Firing Julian was justice. Dealing with Sarah, that was tragedy. I took a breath, steeled myself, and opened the door. The air in conference room B was heavy, stale, and smelled faintly of fear. When I opened the door, 4 faces turned toward me in unison. Sarah, Kevin, Maya, Leo. My CoreX dream team. The people I had handpicked, mentored, and defended for years. They were sitting around the small circular table like students waiting for the principal. On the table, someone had left a box of donuts untouched. Sarah stood up immediately. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying. She looked exhausted, stripped of the bravado I had seen through the warehouse window just 3 nights ago. "Elena," she started, her voice cracking. "We didn't know, he told us. He told us you were consulting. He said you were a silent partner in Novo." "Sit down, Sarah," I said. My voice was quiet, lacking the warmth she was used to. She froze, then slowly sank back into her chair. I walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room. It was blank. I picked up a marker, uncapped it, and drew a single, horizontal line. "This is the trust baseline," I said, turning to face them. "You are all currently operating below it." "He showed us the books," Kevin blurted out, defensive. "He showed us the projections. He said the Spire was dead weight and Novo was the future." He offered us equity, Alina, real equity. We have student loans, we have families. I know, I said. Julian is a very good salesman. He sold you a dream where you were all partners, where the work was easy and the money was free. I leaned against the table, crossing my arms. But here is the part that insults me, I continued, looking directly at Sarah. You saw the drawings. You saw the Zenith blueprints. You saw that he had taken my name off the title block and replaced it with his own. You saw the wind shear calculations that we did together in 2019, repackaged as Novo proprietary tech. Sarah looked down at her hands. You didn't just chase a paycheck, I said. You participated in plagiarism. You watched him erase me and you didn't send a text. You didn't make a call. You toasted him with cheap wine. The silence in the room was absolute. They knew I was right. They couldn't hide behind we didn't know. They knew the work was mine. So, I said, capping the marker, here are your options. I held up 2 fingers. Option 1, you pack your things. Security escorts you out. I will personally ensure that your references reflect your participation in a scheme involving corporate espionage. You will likely never work in a tier -1 firm again. Maya made a small, choked sound. Option 2, I said. You stay, but you are no longer senior associates. You are no longer leads. You are junior drafters. Your equity is gone. Your salaries are reset to entry level. Alina, Sarah whispered. That's the cost of the steal, I interrupted. Because we have to fix the spire. We have to strip the grade 300 beams out of the truss network and replace them with grade 900. It is going to be brutal, dangerous, around-the-clock work. I need people who know the math, but I don't trust you to lead. You will report to Marcus. You will double-check every bolt. You will recalculate every load. And you will do it until that building is safe. I looked at them. Do you want to build or do you want to leave? Sarah looked up. Tears were streaming down her face, but her jaw was set. I want to build, she said. Me too, Kevin said quietly. Good, I said. Report to the site at 600 tomorrow. Wear your boots. It's going to be a muddy spring. The next 6 months were a blur of noise, cold, and welding sparks. We didn't just fix the building. We performed surgery on it. We had to shore up the 20-story skeleton with temporary supports, cut out the cheap steel Julian had installed, and fly in the new, heavy-grade 900 beams by crane. It was dangerous work. The wind off Lake Michigan was relentless. I was on site every day. I didn't sit in the glass office. I stood on the staging platforms, 200 feet in the air, watching Sarah and Kevin crawl through the truss network, measuring torque with laser precision. They worked like they were serving a penance. They were the first ones there and the last ones to leave. They didn't complain. They checked the math 3 times. Slowly, very slowly, the trust baseline began to creep up. The Vance Spire was rebranded. Elias suggested the Meridian Tower, but I vetoed it. Keep the name, I told him. Let it be the Vance Spire. Let it stand as a reminder of what almost happened. By October, the structure was sound. The glass curtain wall, the beautiful, twisting DNA helix, was finally installed. When the last panel went in, sealing the building against the wind, I stood on the roof with Marcus. The sun was setting, turning the lake into a sheet of hammered copper. It holds, Marcus said, patting a massive steel column. She's solid, Alina. You could hit this thing with a meteor and it wouldn't budge. It holds, I agreed. I looked out at the city. I saw the other buildings I had worked on, the skyline I had helped shape. But this one was different. This one had almost killed the company. This one had cost me my brother. You hear from him? Marcus asked, knowing exactly where my mind went. No, I said. My mother says he's in Arizona, selling timeshares or something. She sends him money, I don't ask. He'll never build anything like this, Marcus said. No, I said, he won't. I took a deep breath of the cold air. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I felt tired, deeply, structurally tired, but I also felt strong. Let's go down, I said. We have a grand opening to plan. We took the construction elevator down. The cage rattled as it descended. I had rebuilt the building. I had rebuilt the team. I had saved the firm. But as the ground rushed up to meet us, I realized there was one final piece of business left. One final door to close before I could truly say it was over. The corner office on the 45th floor doesn't echo anymore. When Julian occupied this space, it was a museum to his ego, sparse, cold, with a desk that looked like a landing strip and chairs that were too uncomfortable to sit in. He used to stand by the window for hours, staring at the reflection of his own cufflinks against the skyline. I changed the locks the day I moved in. Then, I changed everything else. I brought in drafting tables. I covered the walls in cork and pinned up sketches, material samples, and wind tunnel data. I replaced the Italian marble desk with a slab of reclaimed oak. The room smells like graphite and coffee now, not expensive cologne and fear. It is 6 p.m. on a Tuesday in November. The city outside is already dark, a grid of amber and white lights stretching to the horizon. On the corner of my desk sits a heavy bronze medallion, the AIA Gold Medal for Structural Innovation. It was awarded last night at a gala I almost didn't attend. The citation praised the Vance Spire, now officially the Helix Tower, for its audacious engineering and uncompromising safety standards. Uncompromising. That was the word they used. My assistant, a sharp young man named David, not the investigator but a new hire, knocked softly on the door frame. "Elena, you have a visitor. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says he's family." I stopped highlighting the schematic in front of me. The marker hovered over the paper. "Send him in," I said. I didn't stand up. I didn't check my reflection. I just capped the marker and waited. The door opened and Julian walked in. It had been a year. In my head, he had become a monster, a caricature of greed. But the man standing in my office was just a man. He looked thinner. His suit was off the rack, the fabric slightly shiny under the studio lights. He wasn't wearing a tie. He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on the cluttered drafting tables, the messy piles of blueprints, the life that filled the space he had kept so sterile. "You changed the carpet," he said. It was a stupid observation, the kind you make when the silence is too loud. "The old one stained too easily," I said. "Hello, Julian." He walked over to the window, his old spot, but he didn't lean against the glass. He kept a respectful distance, as if the view didn't belong to him anymore. "I saw the news about the award," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the medal. "Congratulations, the Helix looks good. It looks stable." "It is," I said. "What do you want, Julian?" He flinched at the directness. He put his hands in his pockets, hunched his shoulders. The king of the skyline posture was gone, replaced by the slump of a man who had spent 12 months hearing the word no. "I'm in Phoenix now," he said. "Commercial real estate. Strip malls mostly. It's money, but there's a developer there. He wants to do a boutique hotel. Small scale, high design." He paused, licking his dry lips. I showed him some of my old sketches, the conceptual stuff. He likes them, but he knows about the situation here. He knows about the ban in Illinois. And he wants a reference, Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He wants to know that the financial irregularities were a misunderstanding, a family dispute. If you wrote a letter, Elena, just a short note saying that we parted ways due to creative differences. That I'm competent. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was asking me to lie, again. He was asking me to put a fresh coat of paint over a rotted beam so he could sell it to someone else. He hadn't learned anything. He still believed that reputation was something you could borrow, not something you built. "Competent," I repeated. "I just need a start, Elle," he pleaded, the old nickname slipping out. "I'm drowning out there. I'm 36 years old and I'm leasing space for dry cleaners. I just need one win." I reached into my desk drawer. Julian's eyes lit up. He thought I was reaching for a pen. He thought I was reaching for the checkbook. I pulled out the brass compass, our grandfather's compass. I set it on the oak desk between us. The heavy metal made a dull thud. "Do you know why I kept this?" I asked. Julian stared at it. "Because Granddad gave it to you." "No. Because it doesn't lie. A compass doesn't care how you feel. It doesn't care about your vision or your ambition. It just points true north. If you follow it, you don't get lost. If you ignore it, you walk in circles." I pushed the compass toward him. "You can have it," I said. He looked confused. "I don't want the compass, Elena. I need the letter." "I can't give you the letter, Julian, because you aren't competent, you're dangerous. And if I tell that developer you're safe, and your roof collapses on a family in Phoenix, that's on me. That's my signature on the blueprint." His face hardened. The pity vanished, replaced by the familiar flash of resentment. "You have everything," he snapped. "You have the firm, the money, the award. You took my life, Elena. You can't give me one scrap of paper." "I didn't take your life," I said, my voice calm, final. "I just stopped you from spending mine." I looked back down at the schematic. "Take the compass, Julian. Learn how to use it, or don't, but you're done here." He stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, weighing the rage against the futility. Then he snatched the compass off the desk. Not with reverence, but with spite, he shoved it into his pocket. You're cold, Alina, he spat. You always were. I'm structural, I corrected without looking up. Goodbye, Julian, he walked out. He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall, but nothing fell. The anchors were solid. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hall. Then I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the Helix Tower in the distance, twisting gracefully into the night sky, lit by thousands of LEDs. It was beautiful. It was safe. It was mine. My mother was in Italy. My brother was in Arizona. My team was down the hall, arguing about wind loads and eating pizza. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. I had built an empire. I had locked the door on the people who tried to destroy it. And finally, for the first time in my life, the view from the top didn't make me dizzy. It felt like solid ground.